I went to my most senior camp. They're a group of friends that have been camping here for over 2 decades. The members have changed to the point that the founders have all been replaced, but they've kept the traditions and are willing to work with me. As a result, I've been given the best campsite. It's up the hill, nestled in a clear spot among the trees, so that their camp has shade most of the day, and there's a spot to hang hammocks. A gas line runs up the hill, so I have to keep part of it free of trees, which funnels the breeze straight into the camp. It's noticeably cooler there than the rest of the site. It's also the most dangerous. I heard their shouting before I arrived. I slowed, cutting the noise of the engine down enough that I could make out words. I needn't have bothered. It was nothing but cursing. I couldn't tell if it was an inter-camp dispute, doubtful, they kept the drama to a minimum, or if they were angry at another group, plausible. They had a couple of feuds going on with their younger camps. Or if it was something else. Bracing myself, I hopped off the vehicle and walked in past the line of tents that marked their boundary. There were 5 people in the common area, clustered around their beer kegs. They had a cooler that was outfitted with 4 traps, and they ran lines up through a steel plate that was packed with ice, providing access with chilled beer from the tap at any time. The kegs were all homebrew. Right now, they had all 4 taps open and dark liquor was spilling onto the ground. There was an odd smell in the air that turned my stomach, like a butcher's shop. I thought, finally placing the smell. Is that blood? I ventured, walking closer. Yes! The woman that did the brewing kicked one of the kegs. All of them are blood. I told them I'd come to talk to the thing in the dark. I had a question, I said, and I could also ask about the kegs while I was at it. Sure. She jerked her head at the back of their camp, where the trees crowded in close enough so that their shadows overlapped and the forest floor was noticeably darker under the lattice of their branches. We haven't seen the solars go out all week, though, so maybe it's not home. Rule 10. Keep track of what time the charge on the solar lights typically runs out. If the solars go out before then, do not leave your tents until sunup. Do not open the tents, not even to look. Stay in your tent, try to sleep, and wait for daybreak. I crept into the forest, wincing at the branches that cracked under my feet. Some of the creatures in the campsite were less malevolent than others, so long as they were respected. They wouldn't kill you or even seriously harm you. I'd spoken to the creature in the dark only once before, when I thought to put the senior camp near its lair. I asked if their proximity would disturb it. It replied that they would not, but nor would it hesitate to take any of them were they out in the open when it passed by. I don't know what happened to the people it takes. Their bodies are never found. The entire camp dreams of dying, however, of slow and torturous death in whatever manner they fear most. I dream of the little girl and the beast when I wake, and I know that I'm going to be talking to the police yet again. The creature's lair is nothing more than a mound of broken branches, easily mistaken for a pile of stacked debris. There are some signs, however. The air grows colder as you approach. Sound falls away, encasing you in silence so the only thing you hear is your own heartbeat. Mine was growing steadily faster as I drew near, and it felt like the darkness in between the piled branches was reaching out, gathering up all the lights and dragging it into its doom. Flowers littered the forest floor, the white, parasitic ones with bowed heads, feeding on the tree roots running below the barren soil. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice cracking. I coughed and tried again. "Sorry to bother you, but I have a question." A long silence. I waited, wondering if it was in vain, and perhaps the creature wasn't here. Then it spoke, and its words were rough like stones rolling against each other, and I winced in pain, for it felt like my head was between those stones, and my skull would crack under the weight. It asked me what I wished to know. I told it about the children, that someone had bought ice from them, and also about the kegs as an afterthought. The children are displeased by their lack of prey, they finally replied, and I pressed my fingers against the bones near my ears, as if that could help relieve the pressure. They rejoice at finally being given an opportunity. To do what? The pile of branches shifted, the earth shifted, and I stumbled, realizing in sudden terror that the small lump of debris was not nearly enough to contain the creature inside, and it was far larger and perhaps far more terrible than I had imagined. It shrugged, what had nearly thrown me off the ground. The kegs are just the start, it sighed. More will suffer, all will suffer, and then the dying will begin. My entire campsite was at risk. I felt cold inside. I could evacuate, I thought. I could claim there was something, a gas line rupture, disease outbreak. There was some options available that would explain why I was throwing everyone out. But then, what about my livelihood? Will people return? I'm a little ashamed that greed manufactured into my choices, but this campsite has been in my family for generations, and I wasn't going to run it all now. Eliminate the one that started it. The ground bucked violently, and I was thrown to my hands and knees. Everything will unravel. I stumbled to my feet, thanking it profusely. I gibbered my apologies for disturbing it and gratitude for its advice. Then I fled, fighting the urge to look back the entire time. Eliminate the ones that started it. Those words rattled around in my head as I went from campsite to campsite, asking if they had bought ice from the children today. I received quizzical looks from the newer campers, but the older ones answered solemnly, understanding the gravity of my question. They read the rules. Finally, I found the camp that bought the ice, and they identified the person that had made the purchase. He was elsewhere at the moment, but I could stop by later, they suggested. I said it was fine. I wasn't ready to talk to him. I wasn't ready to take the creature in the dark's advice. I thought, how bad could it be? It was only just the beginning. Perhaps I could find some other way to resolve the situation. I spent the evening digging through my books of camp management and folklore, trying to find some sort of ritual or appeasement I could try. Yet the creature had said that the children were tired of not having prey. Prey I denied them with my rules. And this would only get worse and worse until people started dying, that everyone was in danger. Night fell, and I reluctantly abandoned my efforts until the morning. My worry made it impossible to sleep through the little girls weeping outside of my window, begging to be let in. She is not in the rules. She only harasses members of my bloodline. Lucky me. I was almost relieved when the beast came and dragged her off while she screamed in mortal terror, signaling that dawn was near. I threw on some clothes and jumped onto my four-wheeler. I even skipped making coffee. I needed to see what was happening overnight. The man with the skull cup stood on the road, staring off in the trees, and calmly sipping the water inside, like he was taking his morning tea. I pulled up close by and killed the engine so we could talk. "Skipped coffee, did you?" he asked. "Want a drink?" "I am quite satisfied, but I'll gladly accept if you wish to share," I replied with gritted teeth, but then smile again. Now he was just messing with me. I looked in the direction he was staring. A slew of people, 12 in all, dangled in midair. For one brief, horrifying moment, I could only think at the time I'd found someone heeded the rules. Their gutted bodies dangling uncomfortably close to my house, like it was a warning. How the police had let me do most of the work getting it down while they waited on the ground with their damned paperwork. I don't make my staff clean up the remains. That's asking too much. These were alive. I almost wept with relief. They'd been pulled from their tents and stripped naked, then taken into the woods. Their bodies were covered with bruises and scratches from being violently dragged across the ground. Then they'd been hoisted up into the trees, left hanging by their ankles from bows. "Next time it'll be their flayed skin hoisted in the branches," the man said. "You should end this quickly." "I'm surprised by your concern." "I need people to share my drink with," he murmured. "I can't do it if everyone dies." I had to get my brother and both my uncles to help with the terrified campers down. They didn't fight much while we were doing this. just hung there limply, crying or whimpering softly. It made the job a lot easier. Deadweight is predictable, and we could pull them together towards the ladder, get a good hold on them, and then cut the ropes and pass them down to the guard rail. Eliminate the one that started with it. As the abducted campers were taken off to the local hospital for treatment, I delegated the police paperwork to my brother and jumped on my four-wheeler. I returned to the camp that had bought the ice and called the man responsible aside for a conversation. I asked him if he had bought the ice from some creepy children with no wagon, and when he said he had, I asked why he'd broken one of the rules of how to survive camping. It was Rule 18. Hadn't he read it? Oh, he said rakily. That one. Well, there are a lot of rules. I took a breath, held it in a moment. I remind myself that the majority of people have good intentions and don't do things simply to be contrary or cause trouble. That is my responsibility as both camp manager and a decent human being to be understanding and help people. Because we have a common goal. I want them to have a safe and fun camping experience so they come back and they have a safe and fun camping experience so they can come back. This man didn't ignore my rule simply out of spite. It was an accident. An unfortunate accident. I asked him why he glossed over the rule. My tone was polite and friendly without a hint of condemnation or judgment. That's the important bit. People respond in kind. So long as I didn't accuse, he wouldn't become defensive, and we could have had a productive conversation. I've done a lot of reading on conflict resolution and behavioral change. He hadn't taken them seriously, he admitted. He certainly read them. Intently, in fact, because he thought it was a joke. But it was a clever joke, and he enjoyed it. But real? Nah. He pointed to his tents, showed it had 3 feet of clearance between the other tents, Rule 4, and that they brought a longer hose, so they didn't have to split the closer one more than 3 times, Rule 6. Will was there. My system was flawed. It didn't change what I had to do. I thanked him for talking to me and walked away. Then I went into the woods and gathered some things. It took a while to find them all, but I'm familiar with my campsite, and I know where these things are likely to be found. Then I returned to my house with the mushrooms in hand. They're called Destroying Angel, Amita virosa. I crushed it and took their resulting juice, careful not to touch it with my bare hands, back to his camp. I poured it into his reusable water bottle, swirled it around to coat the sides, and then left it to dry. They wrote the initial symptoms off as mere food poisoning. By the time his campmates took him to the ER, he was suffering from liver and kidney failure. They did their best, but I had put a generous dose in the bottle, and his body could not keep up, not even with medical intervention. He was dead within 36 hours. The police dropped by, of course. I talked with them for a bit. We commiserated on how difficult it can be to protect people from themselves. And that was the end of it. They understand what it's like in the forest. I feel I am to blame. I know rules are ineffective, but they were easy, and that's what I relied on. I wrote off the deaths as isolated incidents instead of warning signs that I wasn't doing enough to determine if my rules list and other measures were accomplishing their intended purpose. You know what does help people change their behaviors? Storytelling. It's one of the most effective techniques, far more effective than a list of rules, which according to research is the least effective method, and the most prone to antisocial behavior, which is basically people deliberately sabotaging the system out of spite. Instead of telling someone, do this, you tell the person a story that demonstrates the behavior you want. Preferably true, as it carries more weight. And the more personal it is, the more the individual will relate and subsequently accept what you're trying to tell them to do. I'm a camp manager. I don't have a list of rules because I'm trying to ruin your fun. I have a list because I'm trying to help you from coming back to camp and finding your tent collapsed and full of rainwater and having no dry clothes or nowhere to sleep. I'm trying to keep you from spending half a day setting up tents because you didn't plan where everything would go in advance. And I'm trying to keep you from doing small, simple things that could result in a horrific and most assuredly agonizing demise.